Now, broadcasting from the underground command post, deep in the bowels of a hidden bunker, somewhere under the brick and steel of a nondescript building, we've once again made contact with our leader, Mark Levin.
This is the best of Mark Levin. Merry Christmas. Hello, everybody. Mark Levin here. Our number, 877-381-3811, 877-381-3811. Well, what a night and what a day that followed. And I read through all the columnists who want to be read, and I didn't listen to talk radio today, thank goodness. But I'm watching the news coverage of Alabama. It's amazing how fiction is created, isn't it? Amazing. Do you know that Roy Moore was so repugnant to the Wall Street Journal editorial page and to National Review that at no time in the Republican primary, when those voices had an opportunity to try and influence voters, not that they could, they didn't endorse either Luther Strange or Mo Brooks, the real conservative in the race? Why is that? When I read David French, he was repulsed by Roy Moore long before the Washington Post stories. Same with my friend Jonah Goldberg. In fact, neither of them wrote columns endorsing either Luther Strange or Mo Brooks that I'm aware of. I asked our buddies at Conservative Review to check it out. Said they can't find anything. Can't find anything from National Review in terms of an editorial. Can't find anything from the official editorial board at the Wall Street Journal. None of them. None of them. And yet, wouldn't real conservatives have looked at what was effectively a three-way race? There were many candidates, but a three-way race, and take a stand, particularly if they're concerned about Roy Moore? The President of the United States took a stand. He backed Luther Strange. Now, I took a stand. I backed Mo Brooks. In the general election, I said that I would have voted for Roy Moore. Now, that was before the Washington Post charges came out, but I still would have voted for Roy Moore. As did almost half of the people who voted in yesterday's election, despite the Democrat Party, the Washington Republican Party, the media. He almost won the race. Not because people in Alabama are reprobates, not because evangelical Christians didn't find their way, but because these issues are dropped in our laps and we have to try and make a decision as best we can. Now, I notice that there's a number of columnists and commentators who are convinced that Roy Moore is a pedophile, or that Roy Moore did what his accusers say. That's fine, but there are people who aren't so sure. There are people who aren't so sure. But that's not the real reason. Not the real reason they object to Roy Moore. Let's start from the beginning. The beginning, what I consider the truth about this race. There was a Republican primary. And most of the people writing, patting themselves on the head for their moral superiority, many of the same people who hate Donald Trump, seem to start at the middle, not at the beginning. And I might add, if we had a presidential election today and Donald Trump was winning, he'd still win by a landslide in Alabama. So enough of this nonsense that Donald Trump lost Alabama and so forth and so on. It had nothing to do with Donald Trump. Nothing. Zero. But it had a lot to do with Mitch McConnell. Immediately, the Republican establishment, their media surrogates, their surrogates who write op-eds and columns, their editorial page surrogates, their eyes are rolling. You stick with me. I'm not talking to them. I'm talking to you. There was a Republican primary. Luther Strange was the incumbent, not the elected incumbent. He had been appointed by a corrupt judge, a corrupt governor. Mo Brooks was a congressman and is a congressman from Huntsville, Alabama. Very, very solid conservative. And then Roy Moore. Mitch McConnell decided he was going to reach into the race in Alabama and try and control the outcome. And he wanted Luther Strange to win. Why did he want Luther Strange to win? Because he was a great conservative? No. Because he's a great man of incredible ethics? No. Because Luther Strange was the only one of the three who said he would vote for Mitch McConnell to be majority leader. Mo Brooks, the conservative, said, no, I won't support him, as did Roy Moore. Then McConnell and Rove and a guy by the name of Stephen Law and others, they calculated that their biggest problem, should there be a runoff, no candidate getting 50% in the Republican primary, their biggest problem would be Mo Brooks. How do I know it? They told Politico that. Where is it? On July 31st, 2017. Mo Brooks was the problem. And they spent millions and millions of dollars smearing Mo Brooks, character assassinating Mo Brooks, lying about his record. It got so bad that an old buddy of mine from some time ago, Ramesh Panaru over at National Review, he wrote a piece saying a failed hit on Representative Mo Brooks, referring to the Senate Leadership Fund. This is a front group, a PAC controlled by McConnell, that he opposed the wall. Mo Brooks was turned into an anti-Trump, pro-open borders, big government Republican. Complete and utter lies. Because McConnell, Rove, and this guy Law, they concluded that they needed to take out Mo Brooks. If there's a runoff, they could take Roy Moore. They'll beat Roy Moore. A runoff against Mo Brooks would be much tougher. Let me read a little bit. From this Politico piece. And you see, the point is, ladies and gentlemen, Mitch McConnell was wrong. He miscalculated. They took out Mo Brooks. And they didn't defeat Roy Moore in the runoff. Now, did they? Roy Moore was the nominee in part as a result of the not-so-clever shenanigans and efforts by the not-so-smart McConnell, Rove, and Law, who do this a lot from their offices in Washington, D.C. I won't read the whole piece. You can read the whole piece. There's other stories, too, about this. McConnell wages war down south, Politico, July 31, 2017. It's a massive undertaking. I'm only reading part of this. By McConnell and his allies on behalf of Strange, who was appointed a mere 6 months ago to fill the seat until a special election. That is the Jeff Sessions seat. In part, McConnell's urgency reflects his long-standing promise to protect besieged Republican incumbents in primaries. But it also underscores his struggles managing his narrow Senate majority, which were punctuated by the collapse of Obamacare repeal legislation last week after 3 Republicans broke ranks. This past week, Brooks, a member of the conservative House Freedom Caucus, said he would not vote for McConnell as majority leader and called for him to step down after the failure of the health care bill. Much of the Republican leader's efforts in the race is being overseen by the pro-McConnell Senate Leadership Fund. In April, the Super PAC held an event in Birmingham, Alabama, to outline its plans to defend Strange, who made an appearance for part of the gathering. Also present was former George W. Bush advisor Karl Rove, who knows Strange, a former state attorney general, from his past work on Alabama judicial races. We're in for Luther, money, marbles, or chalk, Rove told the crowd, according to one attendee. Since that time, the group has orchestrated a blistering assault against Brooks. Ads portray the 4-term congressman as unsupportive of President Donald Trump, a damaging line of attack in a state where the president is widely popular. One recent Senate Leadership Fund TV ad used footage from 2016 in which the Alabama congressman called the then-candidate Trump untrustworthy. This is when he was backing Cruz in the Republican primaries for president. The offensive was born out of private polling the group conducted in May, testing how voters in the state felt about Brooks's comments about Trump last year. There's evidence that the attacks are taking a toll on the congressman. An independent survey released last week showed Strange leading with 33%, Moore with 26%, and Brooks at 16%. Remember, the goal here was to take out Brooks. and to run against Moore. The Senate Leadership Fund has spent $3.5 million on the race. Turns out they spent more. By far the largest expenditure of any outside group. This is the McConnell group. Yet that figure is expected to grow significantly, especially if no candidate receives a majority of the vote in the August 15 primary and the contest is forced into a September runoff, as is widely expected. The group has pledged to drop $6 to $8 million. The McConnell team is trying to rattle Brooks also. Republican strategist Ward Baker, a McConnell ally whom the leader handpicked to serve as the National Republican Senatorial Committee Executive Director during the 2016 campaign, has been offering guidance free of charge to Clayton Hinchman, a 34-year-old West Point-educated Iraq War vet who has launched a primary campaign against Brooks for his North Alabama congressional seat. So committed were they to destroying Brooks that they said, you keep this up, we're even going to threaten your House seat. We got this great veteran, this hero, to run against you in the House. Now, this Hinchman is echoing many of the same themes National Republicans are using against Mo Brooks in the Senate race, casting him as deeply disloyal to the president. In an interview, Mo Brooks said he believed McConnell's fingerprints were all over Hinchman's campaign. Brooks said the leader had engaged in a systematic effort to strong-arm and bully candidates opposing Strange. While McConnell's team is increasingly optimistic, it later says, about Strange's prospects, it concedes the race hasn't been easy. Senate GOP officials have made it clear to the administration they would like to see Trump express some measure of support for Strange. Yet 3 White House aides said they don't expect a Trump endorsement, and yet they got one. And it goes on. You can read it. They were targeting specifically, aggressively, overwhelmingly Mo Brooks. They wanted to knock him out so they would have a chance to go one-on-one against Roy Moore. That's exactly what they did. They went one-on-one against Roy Moore, and they lost to Roy Moore. So conceited are they in Washington. So conceited are McConnell, Rove, Law, and the rest of them. They just thought they would knock off Moore. And that's what they did. Roy Moore was the nominee of the Republican Party, not because of Steve Bannon, who I suspect most people in Alabama do not know. He's the nominee of the Republican Party, more so because of the way Mitch McConnell decided to interfere in this race and the way it blew up in their faces. And so furious was Mitch McConnell, long before the Washington Post article came out, he would not support Roy Moore because he beat Luther Strange. Now, all the moral preening by our new moralists out there, these columnists who keep telling us they told us so. Well, why didn't they tell us that? During the course of the Republican primary, why didn't they pick sides? They have big mouths. They write incessantly to each other, among one another. Why didn't they say during the course of the Republican primary, when the choice, Mr. French, was not binary, when the choice, Brother Jonah, could have been made right there and then? Why didn't you back Luther Strange then? Why didn't you back Mo Brooks then? Why did the Wall Street Journal editorial page not back Luther Strange? Why didn't National Review back Mo Brooks? And now they want you to believe that they were right about this all along. They haven't been right about anything. They're not right about anything. The other thing that bothers me a lot about this is, who cares if they're right or wrong? This isn't about columnists, websites. It's not even about Mitch McConnell. The media have this all wrong, and I think intentionally so. What I'm about to say will be provocative and controversial to some of you, but it ought not be. There is no nationalist, populist movement in this country. There are nationalist populists, but there is no great nationalist populist movement in this country. We won 2010 the House. We won 2014 the Senate. The Republicans, we won the presidency in 2016, not because of a nationalist populist movement. because it's the good old conservative movement, the good old Tea Party movement. We've never gone away. We've never gone away. Doesn't mean we agree on everything. Doesn't even mean we agree on candidates. I want to further expand on this when I return.
Mark Levin.
This is Martin Levin wishing you a very Merry Christmas. Now back to the best of me. You simply keep beating one's chest to saying there's a nationalist populist movement. And I notice they've added nationalist populist conservative because people know what conservative means. Doesn't make it so. Who's the leader? Who's the leader? Donald Trump? No, Donald Trump, I don't believe, views himself, and he's a nationalist populist. As a matter of fact, he says he's a conservative. I don't think he's a philosophical conservative. I think he's a nationalist populist. I even told him this when I met with him. I think the way he views things now is through his own life's experience and his own dealings with politicians in Washington, D.C. And he's not given enough credit, particularly by the never-Trumpers, for many of the conservative policy things that he's doing, that Jeb Bush would not have done, that Kasich would not have done, that so many of them would not have done. He doesn't get credit. He doesn't get credit for facing down, rationally, North Korea, Iran, the Palestinians when it came to naming Jerusalem the capital, and on and on and on and on. You're listening to the best of the Mark Levin Show. Have a very Merry Christmas.
More logic than allowed by law. The Mark Levin Show. Call now at 877-381-3811.
So McConnell and his surrogates who started all this in Alabama, who tried to fix the outcome of the Republican primary. Many of the establishment Republican and McConnell surrogates in the pseudo-conservative and conservative media sitting on their hands, waiting until after the primary, some waiting until after the runoff, to demonstrate to us how morally brilliant and strategic they are. I really dismiss them. What's the point? But we need to have a debate in this country. At least we conservatives / and so-called Republicans. A serious debate. I'm not going to be bullied and kowtow to the dug-in old guard, which demands compliance, which has its surrogates all over the media, including pseudo-conservative and conservative media, telling us what to think, how to think, when to think, telling us how brilliant they are. They're not so brilliant, actually. See, I remember when Ronald Reagan was an outsider. I remember when he had to fight like hell to win the Republican nomination for President of the United States. I remember when he had to fight the Bush family. I remember when he had to fight Karl Rove and people like Karl Rove. There is a Republican establishment, and it almost succeeded in sabotaging a Reagan nomination. And they were vicious, and they're always vicious. Everybody challenging the Republican establishment, the Mitch McConnell types, and McConnell was a Gerald Ford guy, by the way. Every one of them is not Roy Moore. There are some very good people who are trying to defeat some very average people who've bought into this whole thing of big government and favoritism, and lobbyists, and telling us one thing while in Washington they do another. In fact, Mitch McConnell will never tell you that the greatest vote-getter in modern American history, modern Republican history, was the most conservative president in the last century, maybe in any century. He was an outsider. They tried to stop him. Mitch McConnell's friends tried to stop him. The Bushes and their friends tried to stop him. But they couldn't stop him because of this conservative movement, not a nationalist, populist, agrarian movement, not a Jacksonian movement, Just common sense conservatives who've had enough of big centralized government. They've had enough of being lied to, as they have now. And maybe we ought to talk about that kind of immorality. That'll never be leaked to the Washington Post, never be leaked to any media outlet, because they don't much give a damn. This kind of immorality they sanction. The immorality of telling the voters one thing and going to Washington and doing another. The immorality of putting your hand on a Bible and swearing to uphold the Constitution when in fact you have no intention, effectively, of upholding the Constitution. When you get elected saying that you're going to repeal Obamacare and you don't. Even the proposals to repeal Obamacare weren't repeals for Obamacare. When you talk about slashing taxes across the board, when in fact you're not slashing taxes across the board. When you say you're going to secure the border and you have no intention of securing the border. When you have a little kid and they lie and lie and lie over and over again, you realize you have a character problem on your hands. There's something wrong with your little kid. When you have a political party that does the same thing to the base, that hands it a majority in the House, a majority in the Senate, and the presidency, you have a problem on your hands. But the answer isn't nationalist populism. The answer isn't to be a knockoff of the Democrat Party and to hold up Andrew Jackson as your great hero. The answer is to get back to first principles. And first principles are not abstractions, and they're not theories. It's our first principles that created this civil society. It's our first principles in this country where we, most of us anyway, respect individuality and freedom. It's our first principles that recognize private property rights. It's our first principles that recognize the dangers of a centralized government and the need to diversify power. It's our first principles that recognize federalism. It's our first principles that recognize unalienable rights of the individual and the family. It's our first principles that recognize the whole notion of a nation state. Those are the first principles that created the greatest country on the face of the earth, and the greatest people on the face of the earth. Why would I abandon that for Andrew Jackson? Why would I abandon that for Mitch McConnell? Exactly what is Mitch McConnell's vision for the country? Exactly what is the nationalist populist vision for the country? See, we conservatives have a problem. We're getting blitzed from both ends. I'm not talking about on the political spectrum, but we're getting blitzed from both ends. And we need to have a debate, a national debate, on who we are, where we want to go with this country, and how we're going to reform the Republican Party. And how we're going to reform the Republican Party. We need to have a debate. We must not be shouted down or bullied or threatened with political action committees or headlines or anything of the sort. The Democrat Party today is a party that attacks America's customs, traditions, and institutions daily. It's a party of demagogues, like Kirsten Gillibrand, a complete fraud and hypocrite. It is a party that seeks the endless transformation of America. It is a party that supports lawlessness as long as that lawlessness justifies an end that they support, whether it's so-called sanctuary cities or an out-of-control special counsel investigating a fake issue, like collusion with Russia by the Trump world. I was looking at the headlines. NRO, a failed hit. Washington Post. Let's see here. What am I trying? Oh, Politico, rather. Got a lot of paper here. 5 takeaways from Alabama's startling special election. The Hill. 5 takeaways from the Alabama Senate upset. NRO. It's never fun to lose a Senate seat, but the GOP dodged a bullet. NRO, Alabama conservatives made their stand. Now, the irony on that one is previously Alabama conservatives and evangelicals were attacked for nominating Roy Moore. NRO, Roy Moore does the impossible. Roy Moore. Politico. Oh, well, whatever. You know the headlines. Maybe Mr. McConnell shouldn't have messed around in the primaries in Alabama. Maybe the outcome would have been different. Maybe the outcome would have been different. When you spend millions and millions and millions of dollars lying about somebody, smearing somebody, character assassinating somebody like Mo Brooks, that has an effect. Maybe Mitch McConnell should have stayed out of Alabama. Maybe Mitch McConnell should have treated the people of Alabama with some respect. And I also notice, almost completely absent from these pseudo-conservatives and so-called conservatives writing their columns, were the dirty tricks and arguments of the Democrat Party. Put Roy Moore aside for a minute. Electing the Republican would bring back segregation. The Republican was like George Wallace. The race baiting to get out the black vote was way over the top. Way, way over the top. The Democrats get no criticism for that. We have to be of a myopic view. We're not allowed to look even across the aisle and criticize what they did. No, you don't understand, Mark. The Republicans dodged a bullet. They lost the election. The Republicans dodged a bullet. They lost the election. And then we're told, poor Mitch McConnell only has 51 votes now. Poor Mitch McConnell created this scenario. Just the way he reached into Mississippi to save Thad Cochran, who doesn't even know how to tie his loafers. They keep talking about the race against Harry Reid in Nevada. That was a 5-point race. He almost lost to the majority leader of the United States Senate. And that they treat the Republican like she's some kind of kook. She almost won. The Republican establishment, including Mitch McConnell, they talk about Indiana. Oh, poor Dick Lugar, he would have won, except he was knocked off by a nut in the Republican primary. He was not a nut. He was a good man. He'd been the treasurer of Indiana. They went out there and destroyed the guy, the Republican Party. They withhold money from him, and now we have a Democrat from Indiana. That's the truth. That's the absolute truth. We had Ken Buck, who's now a congressman from Colorado. He won the Republican primary. They hated Ken Buck. He's running against this guy, Michael Bennett. The Republican establishment did everything they could to knock off Ken Buck, and they succeeded. We have a Democrat from Colorado. Take a look at Alaska and Murkowski. She lost the Republican primary, but she wouldn't give up. She wouldn't give up. A big government liberal who hurt us on Obama repeal. So she launches a write-in campaign and wins by the skin of her teeth. Some big tent, this Republican Party. The old guard doesn't give up easily. And they have their so-called conservative surrogates in the so-called conservative media and in the pseudo-conservative media, who defend them, if not outright, certainly at a distance. I'll be right back.
Mark Levin.
This is Mark Levin wishing you a very Merry Christmas. Now back to the best of me. One very, very important point. I think people are Pollyannas if they don't think the Republican Party is in trouble in the midterm elections. Again, I'm not in the prediction business. I'm not really good at it. I thought Moore would slip through yesterday. Actually, it was Jones who slipped through yesterday. But I said I'm not sure. But none of that matters. What matters is this. I think the conservative base of the Republican Party is dispirited right now. And I think the Democrat base is hyped up on the usual issues. But I think the conservative base, having delivered the House to the Republicans in 2010 and every election cycle thereafter, having delivered the Republicans the Senate in 2014, having delivered the Republicans the presidency, and still having failed to repeal Obamacare, and Obamacare is a big thing in the lives of every American, still having failed to do anything legislatively whatsoever to secure the border, and I could go on and on. I think the Republican base is dispirited. At the same time, I think the President of the United States is doing everything he can on these issues. But he's not a king. He's not Barack Obama. Again, this is the fault of the Republican House and the Republican Senate, which, of course, gets a pass by the Wall Street Journal editorial page and the other pseudo-conservative elements out there, because they hate Trump. But if you're sober about this, and you try to really think it through, and you don't have a stake in Trump's failure, or you're not humiliated by his victory, then you know I'm right. Look, I try to call him as I see him. I supported Cruz in the Republican primaries, and when he lost, I supported Trump against Hillary. It's that simple. And Trump wanted conservative support, and he went to Gettysburg. He gave a very solid speech, and he's tried to follow up on everything he said in that speech. That's more than Mitch McConnell and the Republicans in the House and the Senate have done. They don't care about following up on their promises, and then you get the excuses. Well, there are a couple votes is all they have. Really? Well, then why make promises? Why not say we're going to repeal Obamacare, but only if we have 57 Republicans? That's not what they say. That's not what they say. So the Republican Congress, the Republican House has been around longer than Trump. The Republican Senate's been around longer than Trump. They have dispirited the base, the very people who brought them their majorities. Boehner would attack the conservative movement. And McConnell attacks in his book and otherwise the conservative movement. They can attack individuals. They focus on Bannon and so forth and so on. But it's bigger than that. It's more than that. He's a lightning rod. This isn't a put down. I'm just saying he's a lightning rod, and he wants to be a lightning rod. It takes a lot of effort and work to be in the liberal media all the time. It takes a lot of behind-the-scenes activity and so forth. That's fine. But it's bigger than that. They don't like us. They don't agree with us. They are not about to do the hard work that's necessary to cut the size of government, to cut spending, to support federalism. They're not going to do it, despite what they say. You know, life is stressful, even worse when the IRS is after you for back taxes. You agonize when they'll show up, seize your bank accounts, put a lien on your home, or garnish your wages, right? It was even worse for Lori. Lori was engaged but knew bringing $25,000 of IRS debt into the marriage was no way to start her new life. Lori did something really smart. She called Optima Tax Relief. Optima stepped between Lori and the IRS, analyzed her case, uncovered some game-changing facts that allowed them to settle her case in her favor. When Optima told Lori that her IRS problems were over, well, she called it the happiest call of her life, and her wedding was back on. Optima has resolved over $500 million in tax debt relief for their clients, and they're A-plus rated with the Better Business Bureau. Getting your life back starts the moment you call Optima for your free consultation. Here's the number. It's simple. 800-499-6300. There you go. 800-499-6300. That's 800-499-6300. I could be wrong, but I think I'm right. I think we Republicans, we conservatives, we have a hell of a time coming up in the midterm elections. Not only are they typically tough for the party in power, but people are dismissing what took place in Virginia. The Republicans controlled 64 assembly seats in a 100-seat assembly. The outcome is still unknown. They're holding on to 51 seats, but they could lose it. That's a blowout. Absolute blowout. And by the way, Karl Rove and Mitch McConnell had their candidate, right? Gillespie. He was one of them. I'll be back.
here. Now, broadcasting from the underground command post, deep in the bowels of a hidden bunker, somewhere under the brick and steel of a nondescript building, we've once again made contact with our leader, Mark.
You're listening to the best of the Mark Levin Show. Have a very Merry Christmas. Hello, everybody. Mark Levin here. Our number, 877-381-3811, 877-381-3811. I think we can agree, I don't expect the media to agree, that the Mueller investigation is tainted beyond repair. And it wasn't Mueller who uncovered the fact that his lead FBI investigator was in fact a political hack driven by ideology and his girlfriend through his extramarital affair, and she too having been temporarily working for Mueller. But it was the Inspector General who found that out, which tells you that Mueller doesn't even know what the hell is happening under his nose. Now, Rod Rosenstein is the Deputy Attorney General. He's the Deputy Attorney General of the United States, and to me, he has a lot to answer for. I thought the Republicans did a pretty good job today, by the way. Now, here's the thing, in my view. He knows. He knows what he's doing when he's testifying there. He knows the obvious political bias that was taking place in the Mueller investigation. He knows it. He ultimately is in charge of the Mueller investigation. The reason he's ultimately in charge of it, because Mueller effectively reports to him. See, there's a good old boys network at the Department of Justice. I was familiar with this when I was there. And it's 98% liberal Democrats. Most of the conservatives have been pushed out of the Justice Department by now. How else do you explain the makeup of Mueller's team of Hillary and Obama donors? And the number 2 guy, Weissman, who's a complete reprobate. Why didn't Mr. Mueller reach out to other prosecutors with a little bit more diverse backgrounds? Why all liberal Democrats? I told you this before, and I believe it. The highest echelons of the FBI now are controlled by the left, or Democrats, or people who are sympathetic to those views. I think this is one of the reasons there's constant leaking. And James Comey leaked. He confessed because it was going to be uncovered when he was testifying before Congress, as if it was no big deal, because I actually think for the highest echelons of the FBI it is no big deal. And they have a long history of leaking. J. Edgar Hoover leaked. During Watergate, the number 2 deputy director of the FBI leaked because he was angry with Nixon for not giving him the directorship. And Mr. Mueller's operation has a long history of leaking, and they're leaking constantly. But this operation is absolutely poisoned with politics. Poisoned with politics. The way the Hillary Clinton serial violations of the Espionage Act were not seriously investigated, the way she was not seriously questioned, the way evidence was not seriously secured or examined, the way others were not seriously examined. And then on the other hand, you have the Trump side, where we have a completely phony pretext, collusion with Russia. No basis, no evidence whatsoever. Pushed by the Democrats, agreed to by Rod Rosenstein, the Deputy Attorney General, and off they go on the races. Now, let's take a look at some of this. Let's take a look at the hearing of Ross Rosenstein. Let's see here. I want to get some of the good stuff. Trey Gowdy does a pretty good job. He does a very good job when the cameras are on. I just wish he would do a better job when it comes to actually doing the work. But in any event, that's just me. Talking about this FBI agent, Peter Strzok, and the conflict of interest. Cut 18, go.
And then we have a senior agent assigned to investigate Secretary Clinton's email, help draft the exoneration letter. Will we change the language from grossly negligent to extremely careless? interviewed Secretary Clinton in an interview I've never seen, and I doubt you have either in your career as a prosecutor. Interviewed Michael Flynn, was actively involved in the investigation into the Trump campaign before the Inspector General found his text. So this agent, in the middle of almost everything related to Secretary Clinton and President Trump, sent pro-Clinton texts, anti-Trump texts to his paramour in response to being told maybe he is where he is to protect the country from that menace, Donald Trump. He said, I can protect our country at many levels. And then he said Hillary Clinton should win $100 million to nothing. Now think about that, Mr. Deputy Attorney General. That's a pretty overwhelming victory. $100 million to zero. And when I read that last night, what I thought was this conflict of interest free senior agent of the FBI can't think of a single solitary American who would vote for Donald Trump. That's where the zero comes in. Not a single solitary American he can imagine would vote for Donald Trump. This is the conflict of interest free special agent assigned. And then he went on, if that weren't enough, to belittle Trump supporters by saying he could smell them at a Walmart in Virginia. This is the person we needed to avoid a conflict of interest. And then he said this, they fully deserve to go and demonstrate the absolute bigoted nonsense of Trump.
Ladies and gentlemen, what is the purpose of this special counsel office? Well, we need something independent from the Justice Department. Well, you certainly have that, but it's not independent from the Democrats or the left. Trey Gowdy went on, cut 19, go.
But he wasn't content to just disparage Donald Trump. He had to disparage Donald Trump's family. This is what he said, Mr. Deputy Attorney General. He said the douchebags are about to come out. He's talking about our First Lady and children. This conflict of interest-free special agent of the FBI. This is who we were told we needed to have an objective, impartial, fair, conflict of interest-free investigation. So he's openly pulling for the candidate he had a role in clearing, and he's openly investigating a candidate that he has bias against. And then if that's not enough, he says Trump is an effing idiot. What the F just happened to our country? This is the same man that said he would save our country. What happens when people who are supposed to cure the conflict of interest have even greater conflicts of interest than those they replace? That's not a rhetorical question. You nor I nor anyone else would ever sit Peter Strzok on a jury. We wouldn't have him objectively, dispassionately investigate anything knowing what we know now. Why didn't we know it ahead of time? And my last question, my final question to you, and I appreciate the chairman's patience, how would you help me answer that question when I go back to South Carolina this weekend?
Congressman, first of all, with regard to the special counsel, Mr. Strzok was already working on the investigation when the special counsel was appointed. The appointment that I made was of Robert Mueller. So what I'd recommend that you tell your constituents is that Robert Mueller and Rod Rosenstein and Chris Wray are accountable, and that we will ensure that no bias is reflected in any of that.
And how are you accountable exactly? Now, let's not let that slide. How are you accountable? To whom? How? Where? When? Go ahead.
Taken by the special counsel or in any matter within the jurisdiction of the Department of Justice. When we have evidence of any inappropriate conduct, we're going to take action on it. And that's what Mr. Mueller did.
Well, you have evidence of inappropriate conduct, serial evidence involving Hillary Clinton and the espionage. See, I'm so tired of this BS. I'm so tired of these platitudes, these canned answers. Well, we have evidence of wrongdoing, we're going to really... No, you're not. That's the whole point of this hearing. You're not. When you have evidence of real wrongdoing, you took a pass. When you have evidence of no wrongdoing, you're digging for wrongdoing. That's the point of the hearing, Mr. Deputy Attorney General. Go ahead.
He learned about this issue. He took action.
Wow, that Mueller, he took action. And part of the action he took was to cover it up and obstruct it, to make sure that members of Congress and the relevant committees, the chairman and the ranking members, wouldn't know about it. Tell me, when did Mr. Mueller tell the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee about Mr. Strzok? When did he tell the chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee about Mr. Strzok? Never. It leaked. It leaked. and who was trying to get to the bottom of this months ago, including with subpoenas. The chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, Devin Nunes, or the subpoenas came later. But he had this guy on his target list. He was trying to get information. He couldn't get any answers. Jim Jordan does an outstanding job, too. Cut 20, go.
But I want to focus on one in particular. One in particular. And this is a text message from Mr. Strzok to Ms. Page, recalling a conversation and a meeting that took place in Andrew McCabe's office, Deputy Director of the FBI, recalling a meeting earlier. And Mr. Strzok says this: I want to believe the path you threw out for consideration in Andy's office. Then there's a break. Dash, it says that there's no way he gets elected. No way Trump gets elected. He says, I want to believe that. You said that in the meeting in Andrew McCabe's office. I want to believe that. But then he goes, but I'm afraid we can't take that risk. Now, this goes to intent. He says, we can't take the risk. The people of this great country might elect Donald Trump president. We can't take this risk. This is Peter Strzok, head of counterintelligence at the FBI. This is Peter Strzok, who I think had a hand in that dossier that was all dressed up and taken to the FISA court.
Let me stop you there. I agree with him completely. I agree with him completely. I believe there's a cover-up on this. I really do. That this guy had a hand in writing the application for the FISA court warrant. I absolutely believe that. Go ahead.
Risk. We have to do something about it. Now, don't forget the timeline here either, Mr. Rosenstein. Peter Strzok, January 10th, he's the guy who changes the exoneration letter from gross negligence, criminal standard, to extreme carelessness. July 2nd, he's the guy who sets in on the Clinton interview. July 5th, 2016, that's when Comey has the press conference and says, we're not going to prosecute. Clinton's okay, we're not going to prosecute. And then August 2016, we have this text message. The same month that the Russian investigation is opened at the FBI, August 2016. And my guess is that's the same month that the application was taken to the FISA court to get the warrants to spy on Americans. Using this dossier that the Clinton campaign paid for, Democrats paid for, fake news, all dressed up, taken to the court. So I got really just a couple basic questions. Because it seems to me if the answer to any of those two questions, if the answer is yes, if you guys paid Christopher Steele at the same time the Democrats in the Clinton campaign were paying, or if you took the dossier, dressed it all up, took it to the FISA court, and used that as the basis to get warrants, and now we have intent in this text message saying, there's another text message, my colleague referenced it earlier, where Mr. Strzok says, I can protect our country at many levels. Says it with all the humility he could muster. I can protect our country at many levels. This guy thought he was Super Agent James Bond at the FBI. This is obvious. I'm afraid we can't take that risk. We can't. There's no way we can let the American people make Donald Trump the next president. I got to protect our country. This is unbelievable.
Now, I'm letting these clips play on because most of you were at work while this hearing was taking place. I think this is a very, very important hearing. I think it's a very important hearing because they are trying to expose the partisanship, the poisonous environment that is taking place here, that exists here, how political it is. And it's very, very important in a republic that this sort of thing be uncovered because Mueller's just marching ahead with his group of leftists. Now, there's another chunk here I want to play of Jim Jordan, Mr. Producer. Let's go to cut 14. Go.
And I'm here to tell you, Mr. Rosenstein, I think the public trust in this whole thing is gone. So it seems to me you got two things you can do. You're the guy in charge. You're the guy who picked Mueller. You're the guy who wrote the memo saying why he needed to fire Comey. You're the guy in charge. You could disband the Mueller special prosecutor, and you can do what we've all called for. Appoint a second special counsel to look into this, to look into Peter Strzok, Bruce Orr, everything else we've learned in the last several weeks.
Yes, Congressman, and I can assure you that I consider it very important to make sure the thorough review is done, and our Inspector General is doing a thorough review. That's how we found those text messages as part of that review.
You've given that answer like 15 times. Let me ask you this. Are you concerned, I mean, this is what a lot of Americans are believing right now, and I certainly do, that the Comey FBI and the Obama Justice Department worked with one campaign to go after the other campaign. That's what everything points to. Think about what we've learned in the last several weeks. We first learned they paid for the dossier, then we learned about Peter Strzok, and last week we learned about Bruce Orr and his wife Nellie. I mean, this is unbelievable. So What's it going to take to get a second special counsel to answer these questions and find out, was Peter Strzok really up to what I think he was?
I think it's important to understand, Congressman, we have an Inspector General who has 500 employees and a $100 million budget, and this is what he does. He investigates allegations of misconduct involving department employees. That review that he is conducting is what turned up those text messages. It will also involve interviews of those persons and of other witnesses.
So it's like for the Senate, it's the Senate Ethics Committee, you know. So we'll wait for the Inspector General. Now, just so you folks understand something, as Mr. Rosenstein is the Deputy Attorney General, he doesn't have to wait for the Inspector General. He can appoint a special counsel if he chooses. And there's somebody else who has the power to appoint a special counsel through this process. You know who that is, Mr. Producer? The Attorney General of the United States. He's not recused from everything. This is tangentially related to Russia, but the substance is corruption at the highest levels of the FBI and in some aspects of the Special Counsel's Office and the Department of Justice. Sounds to me like a perfectly legitimate use of a special counsel. And I have a few that I would suggest we point. You know, we could point Joe DeGenova, you know, somebody like that. I'll be right back.
Mark Levin.
This is the best of Mark Levin. Merry Christmas.
Tomorrow, this body is going to be looking at a resolution supporting the public display of the Ten Commandments.
Listen carefully.
A very interesting case in the state of Alabama where Judge Roy Moore, who presides over a circuit court, this courtroom, a wood-carved plaque containing the Ten Commandments. Challenged by a judge to take those down. The governor of Alabama, Fob James, has stated that he will do whatever it takes to keep the Ten Commandments up in that courtroom, including calling in the National Guard. It is sure to be an entertaining debate tomorrow and very interesting, and I believe a very important debate. But sadly, the entertainment's going to come from those people who will explore to try to twist history, try to continue the revision of history that would separate the country from its heritage. You know, we have a very proud heritage of freedom in this country.
You know who that was, ladies and gentlemen? Way back, March 3rd, 1997. A backbencher congressman by the name of Joe Scarborough, defending Roy Moore, defending the state of Alabama, defending the display of the Ten Commandments in the state courthouse. Chew on that one. I'll be right back. This is Mark Levin wishing you a very Merry Christmas. Now back to the best of me.
Right versus left is right versus wrong. Call Mark at 877-381-3811.
Charles Barkley, ladies